Okay. Emily, welcome to Galway.
Thank
Hope you're
you.
enjoying your stay.
I really am.
Yeah.
What a lovely place.
It is. No, and I suppose I've gotten to know you a little bit over the last week through chatting to you before you came over, and then through catching up last night. But I suppose tell everyone about who Emily is.
Oh my goodness, who Emily is. Who am I? I guess I'll start. It's interesting, Suzanne said, it's so interesting where people choose to start. I guess I'll start around kindergarten when I knew I wanted to be a doctor. And I'm not sure where it came from. Nobody in my family was a doctor. The only doctor I knew was my pediatrician. Hello, Dr. Keller. And I just had this very, very painful curiosity about, what am I? What is the body? What's under the skin? How does it all work? Why is it that when I look at my hand and I think about moving my hand, I can move it? Just almost at a metaphysical level, I was just very, very interested in understanding what all is going on. And I remember when I would go to Dr. Keller's office, it seemed like she knew more about me than I knew about myself, and that really bothered me. And so I thought to myself, I have to go to medical school, I have to catch up. And it really wasn't until medical school that I really felt I could calm down, like I had finally sort of understood what I needed to understand about the body and disease and how it works. And then along the way, there was this whole parallel life in the arts, and I guess maybe parallel isn't the right word to use, because as Suzanne says, we think they're separate, but they're not. They're the same. And so that's how I arrived where I am.
Awesome. So Emily was obviously a very insightful child.
I was an only child. Spent a lot of time inside my own head.
Yeah. And so then we're seeing that transition from being Emily Silverman to Dr. Emily Silverman, MD. And I suppose, when did the idea behind the Nocturnists come around, and how did that come about?
So I always loved reading, writing, film, theater, and at every milestone I wrote in my essays that I was going to blend the arts and the sciences. So if I go back and look at my medical school application essay, and I said that, and then I go back and look at my residency application essay, and I said that, and I don't think I really knew how I was going to do it, although you wouldn't know that from reading the essay. But I knew that that's what I wanted to do, and along the way I took some writing classes, and I played around with a video camera. I went abroad and made a bunch of silly little films. In medical school, I had a really close friend who was an amazing actress and improviser, a musician, and so she and I would play around together and create things together. But it wasn't until I got to residency that any of these little ideas or projects took off, and the Nocturnist was the one that took off. And I'm happy to go into more about that. But long story short, it really felt like one of the first times that I had originated something. I think along the way, I didn't mention this, but another reason I became a doctor is I had a pretty bad case of achievement-itis. And was always sort of climbing the ladder, wanting to get to the next stage, wanting to get to the next rung. A bit of a sheep, actually. And the Nocturnist starting was really one of those moments where I felt like I stepped off the conveyor belt and just went off on this like totally different path, which was really exciting, but also scary.
Yeah. But I suppose, anyone who's kind of done anything like this or originated something like this, it's a labor of love, but also it takes a while to incubate, So was it something that was kind of, the idea, did it come formed, I suppose, or was it something that you were kind of building on, kind of, little by little?
It didn't come formed. So in residency, I actually, the next slide that I have here is a black hole, which I think some people in the audience may like. But I feel like a lot of creative acts are born from moments of just sort of crumbling and composting and death, the whole death and rebirth thing. And in the middle of residency, I was really coming up against a lot of questions around what is it to be a doctor and to practice medicine. It wasn't what I expected it was going to be. What I imagined when I was 5 years old, I did not imagine that I would be spending over half my time sitting in front of a computer.
Yeah.
So I came up against sort of this existential crisis and started writing and posting what I wrote on a blog, and that was very cathartic for me. But I wanted to create a space where my colleagues could also come and lift their voices. And because I knew it wasn't just me who was struggling with burnout, it was a national issue, even way before COVID, as all of you know. So what happened was my friend Miriam, hi Miriam, took me to a live taping of The Moth, which is a live storytelling show that's on NPR, public radio in the States. And it was this really magical night. I still remember we went to Public Works, this really beautiful venue in San Francisco, kind of an old warehouse, very hip. I hadn't been in a place like that in so long. And just people, they pulled their names out of a hat and they went on stage one by one and told real stories about themselves. And I got home and just thought to myself, this is what we should be doing in medicine. And so I'm going to do that. And then actually I have a slide here. This is a photo from January 2016, the very first time the Nocturnists had a gathering. And I rented this beautiful Victorian living room from a group home for like $90. And they let me invite in maybe 30 to 40 of my friends and colleagues. And we had an evening of storytelling, and it was not fully formed. I had no idea what I was doing. But it was a really magical night. And there were tears, there was laughter, and people approached me after the show and they said, when is the next one? When is the next one? And then it was off to the races, and I've been doing the shows ever since.
That's amazing. And it's kind of like almost the opposite of what Suzanne was talking about earlier on, that we sort of limit ourselves because of that sort of perfectionism, but you were just like, no, I'm just going to rent out a theater and ask all these people to come along. Just went straight for it. Like that's amazing. I suppose this sort of expression, like the narrative medicine, it's sort of a church of the willing. All those people that came along to it and wanted to take part and engage with it, they're bought into it. Like you're not having to sell it to them, I suppose, but there's still probably a fear, when you're putting yourself out there. How did that feel like?
Well, there was the fear that I had of putting myself out there, and then I think there's the fear of the people participating, the storytellers, that they have standing up on stage in front of an audience of peers and talking about really personal stories. I don't know, there was a fearlessness too, though, in me, I think. I don't know where it came from. It was very uncharacteristic of me. I was always very obedient, a rule follower, kind of straight A's. Like the one time I got a detention in high school for my shirt being too short, I lost it. I was crying. I was like, oh, detention. Like me, never. And so was never a rule breaker or somebody who rocked the boat. But for whatever reason, at this particular moment in time, I just didn't care. I think part of it was that it was a survival mechanism, because I knew that without something like this, I wasn't going to make it through residency. And so that's really what kept me moving forward. And I didn't ask permission from anybody to do this, and received a really warm response from the institution and from my peers and colleagues. So that was really heartening. Yeah. And then, if you want to, later we can talk about storytellers and how they approach it. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that'd be great. I suppose I'll touch on that in a second, but and I suppose you kind of probably answered it there, but was there any resistance or any pushback at any point?
There wasn't. I mean, not that I know of. Part of it was that we were completely independent. And when I say we, it was a very, very small team that I slowly built around myself. So it started with me, and then very quickly partnered with Dr. Allison Block, who's a family medicine physician. So then it was the two of us, and then we added a wonderful documentary filmmaker, Adelaide. So then we were a trio, and then we started to build slowly, and we've had some growth there. But no, there was no resistance. It was just people showing up, and actually the show's selling out with very minimal advertising. And I think the reason why is because there was a hunger for this. But also they weren't paying for it, so
There's that too, yeah.
so I could kind of do whatever I want. And we've remained indie the entire time, so we're not formally affiliated or sponsored by any institution, whether it's UCSF or Stanford or anything like that. And so that was a benefit of keeping it indie, is that if I decide to leave the Bay Area, I can take it with me and or expand nationally or internationally.
There you go.
So that's been nice.
Amazing. And then you mentioned for the storytellers themselves, did you find that people who signed up to this just intuitively knew what to do, or did you have to walk people through how to engage with it?
Yeah, I feel like we could talk about that for probably like 5 hours. But it's been really interesting tonight, actually, or today, to hear about different artistic mediums. So we had Suzanne talking about writing and the written word. We had Monica talking about graphic medicine and illustration and all of the ways of expression that are available through that visual medium. That image of the foot that was on fire, it was like, how could you convey that through words? The image just carries such a power. And I find that audio has its own magic and its own range of opportunities that are available that aren't when it comes to visuals and the written word. And I say audio, but even audio itself splits off into the live performance and the audio, earbuds, podcasts. Even those are different from themselves. I think the medium that is the most dangerous and exciting is the live medium. As I said, I grew up going to the theater, and I've always really loved that electricity of the live performance. The fact that there's a feedback loop between the performer and the audience. So when you're watching a film, Brad Pitt, he can't adjust his performance based on your reaction and your response. But as a performer on a stage, you can really feel the energy of the audience, whether they're laughing or even whether it's silence. We talked about the power of silence and how it's actually a full thing. It's not an empty thing. And so the ability of the performer to read that and then respond accordingly, and then it becomes a conversation. And so that's been really exciting as I've ventured into the theater world and partnered with people in San Francisco who are in the world of theater and performance. But getting clinicians to tap into that skill set has served to be a huge challenge. And I think some of that is left brain, right brain, which we talked about. We are so left brain when we do our jobs in the hospital and the clinic. And performance and theater and storytelling is such a right brain thing. But also some of the most gratifying work of my career has been to take a physician, let's say, who submits a story idea, and it's an essay that they've written, and they want to memorize the essay word for word and stand on stage and recite it word for word, and then just taking that and shattering it, and really just using that as a starting place. And I think for clinicians, sometimes that can be really disconcerting because they submit a story idea that gets accepted, and they think, okay, I'm done, but really the process is just beginning. And so we've done a lot of work on, like, what is that process and how does it work?
Yeah, just unceremoniously yanking them out of their comfort zone. But that, like I was saying in your intro, that work of empowering others, like, giving kind of power to their voice is, I think, is amazing. And you've done it through some pretty memorable moments in, I suppose, world and particularly in American history over the last number of years, through the Trumpian era, through the pandemic. That series, like at the start of the pandemic, was absolutely incredible. And I hadn't heard it when it was first released, but going back to listen to it even a few months later, it was like, wow, it just kind of really puts you back in that zone, How did you find producing that?
That was a huge pivot for us. So if I just advance here, these are the live shows as they grew. This is the last show we did before the pandemic. This is January 2020. We did a live show at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, 700 people. It was a really, really special night. And then, of course, the pandemic arrives and live experiences are not available to us anymore. And that's when we decided to launch this new project, which we called Stories from a Pandemic. And it was just so different from the live show, because for the live show, we would select a theme, put out a call for stories, receive the story submissions, pair the storyteller with a coach, usually somebody from the world of theater and performance. And then they would work very closely during the 6 or 8 weeks leading up to the event to craft that story for the stage. And we saw Freytag's Pyramid just a few minutes ago, really crafting and massaging that story into what is the inciting incident, what is the conflict, what are the stakes, what is the climax, and then how do you want to land, where do we want this story to end. And so there was a ton of work and editing that went into that process. But for the pandemic, nobody has time to do that. Nobody has time to craft the perfect story. So we decided to go with a form of oral expression that was much more visceral and raw, and that was the format of the audio diary. And so what we told our audience is just come home from work and maybe close the door, turn off the lights, and just talk into your phone and just say, what's the date and what happened today and what's going on. And between the months of March and May, we received hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of audio clips from healthcare workers across North America. And it's from that body of material that we produced our series, Stories from a Pandemic. So we have a 10-part audio documentary series, which we then followed up a year later with a part 2. And that was some of the work of my life. I was a hospital medicine physician at that time, and so I remember I would wake up in the morning and go to the hospital, to take care of COVID patients in my PPE, and then I would come home that night and I would lay in bed with headphones and listen to the stories and voices of clinicians around the United States and beyond who were going through the same process in parallel with me, and it really helped me to feel less alone. And we've heard from our audience, whether they were story contributors or people listening, that it also helped mitigate some of those feelings of loneliness and social isolation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like anyone who hasn't heard it, just definitely go back and listen to some of them. It's kind of jarring how quickly it kind of puts you back into those moments, and you're kind of like, feeling those feelings that the people are describing all over again. No, it's really powerful work. The series that actually introduced me to the Nocturnists was the Black Voices in Healthcare series, which I thought was incredible, and again, just all about kind of, empowering people to tell their stories that, that don't get the airtime or the attention that they sometimes deserve. But that whole series was kind of, I suppose the voices that you hear on it, we didn't hear your voice. We were hearing Dr. Ashley McMullen, we were hearing Dr. Kimberly Manning, incredible, storytellers and podcasters in their own right. But how, I suppose, tell us about the series, and how did that, I suppose, entrustment of your voice to them feel? I'm sure it wasn't an easy entrustment.
So this is the artwork for our series, Black Voices in Healthcare. And what happened was the pandemic arrived in March. March through May, every week for 10 weeks, we made an episode. And so we were kind of in a rhythm, hitting a stride where we would receive the clips, make the episode, receive the clips, make the episode. We were doing all of this in real time, almost like Saturday Night Live, if you know the comedy show in the States. And so then after our 10th episode, we decided to stop. We wanted to take a break. And then in June, after George Floyd was killed, an American, but also a global reckoning with the realities of racism and how it manifests in our society and healthcare. And obviously, these are not new issues. These are issues that have been going on for a long time. But I think definitely that particular news item just was so gut-wrenching for everyone. And in me, it brought up this question of, like, what can I do? How can I serve my Black brothers and sisters in healthcare and give them my platform? Because that's all I had. I had this platform. I had the Nocturnists. I had a podcast. I had a live show. And so I was holding it and I was like, who can I give it to? What can I do with it? And the wonderful Dr. Ashley McMullen had performed at that live show just before the pandemic, the large show at Yerba Buena. She had gone on stage and told this beautiful story about her hair and about how all her life she had chemically straightened her hair. And at the time, she didn't realize it, but in retrospect, she discovers that it's because she was trying to fit into a certain box, to a certain standard of what a doctor should be and how they should look. And then partway through her training, she makes the decision to stop chemically straightening her hair and to let her hair go natural. So it was this amazing story she told live on stage, really successful. We had her on the podcast. And so I just called Ashley and I said, how would you feel about partnering to do a series on Black voices in healthcare? And she said, let's do it. So Ashley hosted that series and did an awesome job. And then Dr. Kimberly Manning from Emory came on as an executive producer. And so in that same pace and rhythm, once a week, we would meet on Zoom with Ashley and Kimberly, and we had a couple medical students involved. And again, we produced these episodes in real time. So for this one, we put out a theme and then receive audio clips from the community, put out the episodes, and just kept the work going.
And it was amazing work, to be honest with you. Like my favorite episode of that series, and probably still one of my favorite episodes, full stop, was the hair episode. Like I absolutely love that. There's kind of so like Ashley's story was fantastic, but there was so much to all the different stories that was just so relatable, like, you know. And I think you have a clip from that that we can play.
Yes, so I'll just set up the clip. This is from our series, Black Voices in Healthcare. So this is a clip that somebody sent to us that was recorded on their own time, privately, you know, in their room. This was not something that was performed on stage, but we put out the theme of hair, and this was one of the stories we received, and it's one of my favorites, so we can roll the audio. And
I still remember the day I met her on rounds. I'd taken over a service on the inpatient HIV service, and she had been in the hospital about 30 days. Young girl, advanced HIV/AIDS, battling a couple of opportunistic infections, and she was starting to finally get better. She was being weaned off oxygen and was starting to regain her appetite. We had started her on antiretroviral medicines in the hospital. I remember meeting her, and she's probably 24, 25, slightly older than my kids. And all I could remember was how little she looked and how much hair she had. Her hair was big, it was huge, but it was matted. And she'd been in the hospital, she'd been in the ICU, and through all of that, the transfers back and forth, no one looked at her hair. I've spent many years in the hospital. I'm used to bringing in little hair ties and getting out the little rubber bands on my wrist to give to a patient, because I know Black women, our hair is important. Our hair is part of what defines us. And when people are in the hospital, a lot of times, that just falls by the wayside. The little bowls at the bedside with the one shaving stick and little tiny comb doesn't cut it. It never has, it never will. And there's nothing like having your hair done to make you feel like you're getting better. But this one girl, young lady, was just finally getting better. And I told myself I would braid her hair. I'd never done that for a patient, but there was something about her. She had this fight in her eyes that she was going to get better. And I know that just feeling better about how she looked would help. So I asked her how she liked her hair, and she said, she always got her hair done, twists, braids, different things. So Saturday morning, we got done our rounds. It was pretty early. We didn't have a lot of admits. We were pre-call. And I just went into her room, and I said, hey, do you want me to braid your hair? She was surprised. She said, doctor, you're going to? I said, sure. I said, I've been braiding my sister's hair for a long time. I have 3 younger sisters. I have 2 daughters. both my daughters used to fall asleep with me braiding their hair. I like to tell myself that my hands are soft. I sat by the bedside and I braided her hair into 8 cornrows to the back. She looked fabulous.
It was a gorgeous piece. It was absolutely beautiful, and the whole episode was just really touching. And like, you know, I'm going to keep recommending to you all just to, you know, make sure you listen to that and make sure to listen to that series. Yeah, I suppose. Again, actually, before we move on to that, I just wanted to go back to one thing you said there a second ago that just blew my mind. I'm sorry, but you were planning and recording each episode week on week. Like, how did you do that? Like, you know, we're doing a podcast. We release 1 episode a month, and that takes, like, ask Sarah, like, how much of my time does that take? That is insane. Every week.
That's part of why we stopped after 10 weeks, because we were not going to be able to keep up that momentum in the long term.
Yeah.
But the way it worked is we put out the call for audio diaries, and we expected maybe we'd get 8 or 12 audio diaries. And when we received 100 audio diaries just in the first, I don't know, couple of weeks, we knew that, we have to actually develop a system for how do we archive this audio, how do we label it, how do we categorize it. And so Adelaide was building our Dropbox account, and as the clips were coming in, she was building the Dropbox, and we had to import everything in as it was coming in, and it was very hectic. I mean, it was a pandemic, so that kind of energy matched, I think, the chaos of the pandemic. Was like artistic and creative chaos. And so we finally got everything archived in Dropbox, and we had a labeling system. Every diarist had a folder. And then, we would group it by what week did it come in. We'd release the episode on a Tuesday, and then the clock would reset, and we would say, okay, what came in this week? And then it was 3 of us. It was me and Adelaide and Vishal Kepal, who's a medical student at Brown University. And we would just listen to all the clips. We would meet, and we would say, okay, what stands out? What do we want to hear? These 2 clips are similar, so let's put them together. Or these 2 clips contradict each other. That's very interesting. Let's put them together. And each clip on its own wasn't necessarily a story. It was more of a missive or an audio diary. But once you string them together in a sequence, a larger story emerges from that tapestry. And so when I think about those 10 episodes together, the story is more of a mosaic. It's actually a very different type of storytelling than the traditional Freytag's pyramid, where it's like inciting incident, climax, resolution. It's a much more diffuse form of storytelling that, for me, was really unexpected and really interesting to work in.
Yeah, I actually think I really enjoyed those type of ones where it's just like, you know, you have a slice of life, kind of a slice of life, and then it's followed by something else, and you know, you don't kind of get a sense of where it's all going until it's kind of, you know, at the end you kind of get an overall sense rather than, like you said, an overarching narrative like that. I suppose, kind of reflecting on your journey so far, you started, what, 6 years ago, something like that?
Something like that.
Something like that, and yeah, like I said, a lot has happened since then. You know, how many waves of a pandemic, you know, how many different presidents, and you know, and then the murder of George Floyd, like you mentioned, and the social upheaval that kind of followed that. There's a lot of historic moments that, you know, that you've catalogued through all these people's voices over the last number of years. So it's incredible to think that it's only been 6 years. So where to next?
So where to next? I think what you said about keeping up with the history, there are pros and cons to keeping up with the history. I think the pros is a lot of what has happened really does feel like a once-in-a-lifetime, even once-in-a-generation event, and so it feels important to pivot. And that's such a great thing about being a tiny, small organization, is you can pivot, and you're so lean. You know, if we were a big foundation employing 100 people, we would not have been able to respond that quickly, and so that was actually very cool to see. But sometimes if you try to stay on the news beat too much, it can actually feel really constraining and confining. And so what about stories that are evergreen? What about stories that have an enduring truth, that are disconnected from the news cycle and just exist almost in this other space? And I'm really excited to be working now on a project that fits more into that category. And so this artwork is by the Italian collage artist Beppe Conti. And he created this work of art for us for a new audio documentary series that we're launching this September on the theme of shame in medicine. And the way that this project came to be was a couple of years ago, I got an email from a philosopher in the United Kingdom. Her name's Luna Dolezal, and she studies shame in healthcare, and she's one of the very few people on earth who studies this. One of the other people is a physician at Duke, Will Bynum, who studies shame experiences in medical learners. And so Will and Luna and I joined forces to work on this series. Actually, what Luna said to me was, I've been listening to your podcast for a few years now, and one thing I notice is how often the theme of shame comes up again and again, whether it's the pandemic series or Black Voices series or even the stories for the stage. And I went back and listened to some of our old stuff, and I realized that she was right. Shame is so in the forefront for clinicians and especially for physicians, and it can be acute, it can be chronic, it can be personalized, and it comes out in so many different scenarios. So we decided what an interesting lens through which to examine medical culture, through this lens of shame, the emotion of shame. And so I've been learning a ton from Will and Luna about the emotion itself. How does it work? What is it? What is the phenomenology of shame? How does it move through the body? What does it feel like? And then also we put, as we do, a call out to our audience asking for stories related to the theme of shame in medicine. And we received, again, I think just shy of 200 shame stories. And so again, listen to all this material, and the creative process for this has been really challenging, but also exciting, because you have this just huge body of work, and it's like, okay, how do I find the signal in the noise? How do I group and clump these stories into episodes? And sometimes you'll think you have a theme, and then you'll play a rough cut, and everyone will listen to it and will say, that actually doesn't work. But what if we did this? And so, every week, every couple of weeks, we will talk about the stories and how to clump them, how to group them. And what we've come up with is 10 episodes. Some of them are more general and about the emotion of shame and things like that. Some of them are more specific to a theme. So we have an episode on shame in learning. So what is it like to be a learner who is shamed because you didn't tie a stitch correctly, or who is shamed, by being publicly quizzed in a way that feels really aggressive in front of your peers, and the way you freeze up, and what does that feel like? We have an episode on shame and error, shame and litigation. I don't know how that is here in Ireland, but in the United States, that's a huge piece of being a physician is fear of getting sued and then actually getting sued. We have an episode on shame and mental health. So why are we so afraid to seek help? And exploring that. We have a whole episode on shame and testing. Actually, that was one of the biggest surprises, is how many clips we got from people who failed an exam, maybe failed their boards, and then retook it and passed, but that one failure just had such a disproportionate and outsized presence in their mind and in their identity, and how they weave that into their sense of self-worth as a physician and as a human being. So there's just so much there, and it's a heavy topic, but we have this amazing documentary filmmaker, Sam Osborne, who's doing all of the editing and the sound design. It's his first time working in the audio medium, and he's totally crushing it. And so we're able to, I think, pad the stories with some really interesting framing and metaphors and music, and I think it's going to be a really special series, so I'm excited for everyone to hear it.
Awesome. I'm very excited to hear it. That sounds amazing. I think we have a bit of time for some questions from the audience, if there are any. Let's have a little look. While we're waiting for some hands to shoot up, I suppose another theme that kind of comes up a lot in the podcasts that I've listened to is a lot of people that you'd be interviewing will be talking about having to remind themselves of their humanity, which is a kind of a funny thing that seems to happen to doctors, it's like we kind of forget that we're also human.
It's true. Sometimes people will ask me, you do a lot of storytelling around the clinician, but what about storytelling around patients? And I have two answers to that. One of them is that I just do storytelling around clinicians. It's my area of focus. I'm a clinician. I'm really passionate about caring for the caregiver. It's almost like a form of patient care, one step removed. Somebody said to me last night that you're caring for the caregivers who are then caring for the patients. And so that's just something that I think is really important. But then the other piece is people forget that clinicians are patients too. And, it's so us versus them, doctor, patient, almost as if we're on different sides of things. But doctors are humans. We have bodies. Even though we're kind of conditioned to not be in our bodies. I know when I was a medical resident, I was so out of my body. For years, I was out of my body. I wasn't really sleeping. I wasn't really eating. I wasn't paying attention to any of the signals my body was telling me. It's one of the reasons I love live performance and storytelling, because it's so embodied. You so much have to come back into your body. But yes, I think rehumanizing the healthcare worker, reminding ourselves that we are just like our patients, and really just taking that myth of the physician god or the physician hero. The hero worship came up a lot in the pandemic. I think heroes can be good, and it's important to have heroes in society, but I think that hero narrative can definitely be weaponized. And so how do we think about that? And so, how do we go from the clinician god or the clinician hero or the clinician robot or whatever it is to the reality and softness of the fact that we're all human beings, and that's actually not a weakness, that is a strength, and that is something that enables us to heal in a way that a computer or an algorithm never could.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Any questions from the audience?
We're the last thing between them and dinner, I think.
That's it, I think so. Yeah. Okay, Emily, it's been an absolute honor getting to know you, getting to chat to you, and to sit up here with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.